fiction movies and shows.
Alright, maybe this one's
Hello,
more,
everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Casual Criminalist. As
grasping.
always,
Check out this
I'm
one.
your host, Simon. This one, it's going to be a long one. I was considering breaking it up into two parts, but then I looked at the stats, and for some reason, contrary to all my understanding of YouTube, I mean, YouTube's weird, and I don't understand it that well, but that we did a very, very long episode on, oh my god, Simon, you just published this like a week ago, 2 weeks ago. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. And that did surprisingly well. And YouTube decided to monetize it, which is nice because that means I actually get paid for all my work. And I means I can pay my writers and stuff, which is nice. So I was like, no, let's not divide it up. Let's just do another Beast episode. I don't think it's going to be 3 hours, but it's definitely going to be over an hour, maybe over an hour and a half. 30 pages from David. Gonna be here all morning. Let's go. Oh, it's Ed Kemper. Did I say that? The words of the co-ed killer. This is the guy who was, God, there's that fantastic show. Have they got a new season of that yet? Mindhunter? With, is it Lawrence Fishburne? It's Lawrence Fishburne, right? And the other dude, the younger guy, who's less well known, but is also fantastic. And the woman from Fringe. Oh my God, it's such a good cast. It's such a good show. I like it a lot. It's so stylish. Anyway, speaking of that, let's get into the horror. It was Good Friday, April the 20th, 1973. Ed Kemper drove his 1969 hardtop two-door sedan to his apartment in Alameda, a town in San Francisco Bay Area in the state of California. By his own admission, the whole time, he was thinking about committing murder. Kemper shared the apartment with a male friend of his. He had been a little short on cash of late, so it was his friend who picked up the tab for most of the rent. That's nice, good friends. We're like, mate, where is your half? Where is your half?
I don't know.
When Ed arrived at the apartment, he looked in the mailbox to see if his workers' compensation check had arrived. It had, but it was only for $40 or $263 in today's money. Oh my God, inflation. 1973. $40 was $263 today. And I don't know, I've never lived through a period of super high inflation, but now I am.
Welcome to the jungle, baby.
And you see, like, I got a loan, like a mortgage on a property, just literally the month before it more than doubled in interest rates. And I'm like, wow, my savings account now pays more than the interest on my mortgage, which is incredible. Like, and I locked it in for 7 years, which I know Americans, you get these like 30-year lock-in mortgages, which is just like, oh my God, I wish. But yeah, I locked it in for 7 years, and I was like, that is some incredibly good timing, fact boy.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Ed had expected it to be more. He got on the phone with the state office to see if they'd be sending him any more money. They weren't. Ed became agitated, but his friend told him to relax and not worry about it. His roommate said that he had the rent covered.
I'm gonna assume that this frustration that he's feeling is where things have begun to have gone awry.
No sweat. This was a kind gesture, but Ed began to feel like he was leeching off him, and so after a moment's contemplation, Ed resolved to move back in with his mother until his financial situation improved. That's not the sort of thing that you'd normally like. There's definitely a bit of a running theme with our criminals that we look at on this podcast, that they don't really have a lot of empathy or understanding for other people. But the fact that he's like, oh no, I'm leeching off you, I feel bad about that, is not a common trait in our little psychos that we look at, is it? Living with the mother as an adult, though, probably is. Ed Gein, anybody? Ed returned to his car and drove back to work. He might as well start racking up the hours as soon as possible. Although Ed was a very bright chap and could have gone to university, he'd opted to be a simple labourer for the California Division of Highways. Only 24 years old, Ed Kemper made for a strong and sturdy worker. He was a towering 6'9" tall, or 206 centimetres. Bloody hell, I knew he was tall, but I didn't realise he was that tall. That is a giant of a man. And Kemper wasn't a beanpole either. Although in 1973 he did not have the hefty load of fat that he'd gained in later life, he was strong and solidly built, weighing over 300 pounds or 136 kilograms. Weighing 136 kilograms and not being fat, you are a machine.
Yeah.
In short, Kemper was a giant, and he intimidated a lot of people with his stature. Yet some people did refer to him as a gentle giant because of his polite and generally cooperative demeanour. Kemper was also clean-cut, unlike many of the hippie youth in California at the time, his brown hair cropped close, his only facial hair being a large, well-trimmed moustache, capping off the rather square look with a pair of granny glasses. It's gotta be interesting to be so tall and so massive, because it's like, I'm just going to dress how I want. Like, no one's going to pick on me because I am massive. You dressing like a nerd? Yes. What are the bullies going to do? Nothing, because I am an enormous man.
I'm an enormous man.
After a few hours of work, Ed clocked out and drove south to Aptos, a small town not far away. He arrived at 609A Ord Drive, the house of his mother, Klarna Strandberg, a three-time divorcee, formerly named Turnquist, formerly Kemper, maiden name Stage. She had split from her latest husband, Harold Magnus Strandberg, 4 years earlier in 1969. Meanwhile, Klarna easily supported herself as an administrative assistant for one of the provosts of the University of California, Santa Cruz. Politely knocking on the door, Ed found that Clarnell was not at home, so he used his spare key to let himself inside. Ed had lived with his mother for the majority of the past 3 years since he was released from a state hospital for the criminally insane. Oh my, that's a twist. Everything seems quite normal up until this point. He's a big man, he's working labour, he's smart and polite and kind, and he's also spent some time in a hospital for the criminally insane.
Insane, yeah, what the fuck?
I feel like a hospital for the criminally insane is the sort of thing... What's that song? That boy needs therapy. He's criminally insane. It sounds like something from the past.
And he's criminally
Ed made his way into the
insane.
kitchen. He felt terrible, or as he put it, quote, like a ticking time bomb. I felt that I was going to be caught pretty soon for the killing of those girls, or I was going to blow up and do something very open and get myself caught. A long time ago, I had thought about what I was going to do in the event I got myself caught, and the only choices I saw were just to accept it and go to jail, and let my mother carry the load, and let the whole thing fall into her hands, like it did the last time with my grandparents. Or I could take her life. Wow. Okay, never mind. It's like, Simon, look how much empathy he's got. He's like, he doesn't want his roommate to pay all of the rent. And he's like, I could kill my mother. Holy Ed. Ed sat beside the telephone and made a couple of work-related calls before dialing...
Dude, if you even think about, like, if that fucking crosses your mind, dude, like, what the fuck, bro?
...the number of his mother's office at the university. Clarnell picked up. Ed informed her that he'd be moving back in with her for a bit until his monetary situation looked a little bit brighter. Doesn't he also see? He's like, yeah, I'm moving out. And it's like, mate, either way, I'm paying all of the rent. Although I guess his roommate can get a new roommate who might be able to help pay for it. Anyway, Clarnell's response was stony and curt, betraying only a hint of dismay at the news. She brusquely told him not to wait up because she'd be attending a work function at the university that evening, then would be going out to dinner, and would not be home until late. And by late, she didn't mean 10:15. Clarnell was something of an alcoholic. She could be out all night. Kemper told her, he understood, and hung up the phone. In that situation, I can understand why she's curt. It's like, look, I'm sure when my kids have left home, I'll still love them. But if they want to come back and live with me, they're going to have to f***ing ask, to be honest. It's not just going to be like,
hey, Dad, just letting you know, I moved out of my apartment and I'm going to be living here for a while.
They'd be like, well, yes. There's a word you're missing, and it's please. Who raised you? Ed went out and got himself a six-pack of beer, returned home, and then sat down and watched TV. He didn't eat, he just waited for his mother. To quote, I'd wished to talk to her, really, before anything happened. It was my hope that she would go on good terms. Well, I guess it would be on good terms, because we hadn't really argued or anything when we talked on the phone. Wait, is he just saying he wants to have a chat with his mum before he murders her? Again, holy Ed.
That's very thoughtful, friend.
Ed waited for his mother until midnight before turning off the TV and going to his old bedroom and falling asleep. He slept for 2 hours, waking up at 2 a.m. He went to his mother's bedroom to see if she got him home. Her bed was empty. She was still out. Ed went back to sleep. He awoke again at 4 a.m., walked to his mother's bedroom to see if she was there. Clarnell was in bed, reading a book, one of those cheap trash novels she always had. She looked at Ed as he entered the room. What are you doing up? She asked. Nothing, just wanted to make sure you were home, Ed replied. Clarnell then said sarcastically, oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now. A ripple of hatred coursed through Ed. Tears welled up and stung at the corner of his eyes. It was at that moment he knew for certain that he was going to kill her. This is one of those interesting situations where this guy is a serial killer, but he clearly has emotions. Like, he's not your typical, psychopath, just has been abused. Maybe he has. Well, I guess we'll find out more. Maybe he's been abused. All of this stuff that is like, or he's just born, without emotions or whatever, or, the empathy and such. And it's just like, no. His emotions are all like messed up. No, Ed replied. Well, we'll talk in the morning, Clarnell declared, ignoring the fact that it was already 4 a.m. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, we'll talk in the morning. You don't reply. It is the morning, unless you're a tool. If morning means like breakfast. Fine. Good night, Ed answered. He then turned on his heel and went back to bed. But he did not go back to sleep. To quote, I lay there in bed, thinking about killing her. It's something hard to just up and do. I had the most insane reason for going and killing your mother. Someone just standing off to the side, watching, isn't really going to see any kind of sense or rhyme or reason. There was times when she was and yelling at me, but I felt like retaliating and walking over to the telephone in her presence and calling the police to say, hello, I'm the co-ed killer, just to lay it on her. But I had done some things, and I felt that I had to carry the full weight of what had happened. I certainly wanted for my mother to have a nice, quiet, easy death. Like I guess everyone wants. Yeah, or they don't want death. They don't want to be murdered. They just want to die when they're old in their sleep. Kemper laid in his bed until 5:15 a.m., when he could be certain that his mother had long since fallen asleep. Quote, I went to the kitchen and got a claw hammer. I picked up my pocket knife, opened it, and carried it in my right hand and the hammer in my left. I walked into the bedroom very quietly. She was sound asleep, and she moved a little bit, and I thought she was waking up. I waited and waited, but she just lay there. So I approached her right side. I stood there a couple of minutes, and then I hit her with a hammer just above the temple on the right side of her head. I struck with a very hard blow, and I believe I dropped the hammer or laid it down or something. Immediately after striking the blow, I looked for a reaction. There really wasn't one. Blood started running down her face from the wounds, and she was still breathing. I could hear the blood running into her windpipe. It was obvious I had done severe damage to her, because in other cases I had shot people in the head, and I heard the same effect of blood running into the breathing passages. All of this happened in a few seconds, dude. That is properly grim. And that is like not... It's like, yeah, this is how all people want to die. A hammer blow to the head. Blunt force trauma. That's it. No, that's not how we want to die in their sleep, Ed, you psycho. Kemper then rolled his mother onto her back. He held up her chin with his right hand, and bearing the knife in his left,
man, this
he
guy's
slashed his mother
fucking...
from ear to ear across her throat. Clarnell began to bleed out. Then Kemper inserted the knife deep into his mother's neck and began to saw away at the flesh. Oh my lord.
Yeah.
Moving in a circular motion around the back of her head, returning to the front. After a jagged line of broken skin and sinews separated the head from the rest of his mother's body, with a sharp crack, Kemper broke off Clarnell's neck and ripped her head clean off. The mild-mannered wouldn't hurt a fly, Ed Kemper, ripping his mother's head off. Jesus Christ.
Oh,
The whole
man.
decapitation took no more than 30 seconds. Kemper was very experienced at cutting women's heads off. Oh, I don't remember how brutal this was. I know he's in that Mindhunter show, so it's like, yeah, they're literally studying him because he's a serial killer and just one of the worst. But I forgot how bad it gets, because you kind of hear him talk and you're like, oh yeah, not too bad, and then it's like, no, oh god, the sinew,
Yeah.
blood filling the, dude.
Are you okay, boss?
Kemper proceeded, oh god, I forgot about this. Yeah, I forgot about the necrophilia on his own mother. Jesus. Kemper
Damn.
proceeded to insert his penis into the mouth of his mother's decapitated head in an act of neurotic fellatio. He then did a similar act with a hole at the base of his mother's neck. Oh my god. Quote, I'm not a lizard. I'm not from under a rock. I came out of her vagina, you see. I came out of my mother, and in a rage, I went right back in. For 7 years, she said, I have not had sex because of you, my murderous son. This was one of her arguments, and so I cut off her head, and I humiliated her corpse. Oh my god, that is super
What
I mean,
the fuck?
obviously, Ed Kemper, like, beyond insane. Like, what the f*** are you doing? But also his mum, to say that to him, is also like, well, she was pretty as well, and she definitely did a solid job of him up. For sure.
Yeah, who
Then
says
they
that to their
symbolic
kid? I
acts
haven't had
Kemper
sex in 7 years because of you. What the fuck?
cut out his mother's tongue and vocal cords. He took them into the kitchen and put them down the garbage disposal. The vocal cords, however, were so tough in their texture that the garbage disposal spat out chunks of them into the sink. Kemper was amused and thought, quote, that seemed appropriate, as much as she had and screamed and yelled at me over so many years. No. Kemper then placed his mother's head on a shelf and screamed abuse at it for an hour. Then he threw darts at it. Then he bludgeoned Carnell's head until he had smashed in her face. You couldn't... If someone wrote this as a screenplay, it'd be like, no, it's too much. It's just unrealistic. You know? It'd be like, you've gone too far. Think more American Psycho. That was just how far you could go. It's like, no, the reality is worse. Kemper returned to
Yeah.
his mother's body. In the
Ew,
bedroom.
and she's
Clarnell
fucking
Strand was a
ugly,
big woman,
dude.
6 feet tall, or 183 centimeters, with her head attached, weighing approximately 225 pounds, or 102 kilos. As such, Ed Kemper clasped a pair of handcuffs to his headless mother's wrists so he could pull her using the chain out of bed, across the bedroom floor, and into the closet. Kemper closed the door on his mother's body, concealing it. He then proceeded to clean the bed sheets, flip over the mattress so the blood stain wouldn't be visible, wipe the blood spatter from the walls, and shampoo the slug trail of blood on the bedroom carpet. By mid-morning, the bedroom looked good as new, as if nothing untoward had ever happened in there. Well, I'll tell you a couple of things, Ed. One, you're shampooing the carpet. You can't just flip over a mattress and hope that blood pool is going to disappear. It's going to start to smell. Also, your mum's body is in the closet, mate.
Yeah,
You're gonna do something
what?
about that. The head is in the kitchen. The vocal cords are in the garbage disposal. Good lord,
Vocal
man. It was
cords?
at that point the Kemper became physically ill and thought that he couldn't remain a single minute longer in the house. He had to go and have a drink at a local bar. His head a complete mess. Quote, I still loved my mother, and it's hard for somebody to comprehend that you murder your mother through love. It isn't a rational process. It's a very painful process, and I've still got to live with that. 6 young women dead because of the way she raised her son, and the way he grows up. And what are her closing words? I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk. God, I wish I had. I am willing to proportion a decent amount of blame for how messed up you are, Ed, to your mother. However, how about a little bit of self-ownership? Like, we're all a product of our environments, but we're also, I don't know, you can't blame everything on other people, because there's lots of people who had shitty upbringings who I'm sure had a much shittier upbringing than you, and turned out to be possibly troubled but non-murderous members of society. Some probably turned out totally fine. And yeah, you've got to own some of it, my dude. You can't just be like, it's her fault. You've murdered many people. You put your in your dead mother's mouth. Some of that, mate, is on you. Now, let me interrupt today's video to tell you a little bit about today's fantastic sponsor, Curiosity Stream. Curiosity Stream is a place where you can watch thousands of non-fiction movies and shows. It's all sorts of smart stuff.
Dude, there's no way you're talking about putting your, there's no way he really just did that.
And look, you're watching
Putting an ad right after him talking
It's
about
also cool.
that
If you're in
shit.
person, you just never see any. Probably going to be able to stuff every week. I went to queue. You'll never run out. So go to curiositystream.com/criminalist. You'll get unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction
Jesus
series.
Christ.
And for you guys, just use the promo code criminalist and you'll get 25 $1 of this stuff. Let's meet the Kempers.
Oh my.
Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December the 18th, 1948 in Burbank, California. He was the middle child of 3 children born to Edmund Kemper Jr. and Clarnell Kemper. The baby's father was 6'8" or 203 centimeters tall, which paired well with Clarnell's already considerable 6-foot frame. This resulted in baby Ed being born weighing 13 pounds or 5.9 kilograms. That is a big baby.
That's why you're such a little bastard.
From the beginning, he was destined
Why
to
you're
be
such
a
a little
giant. Ed the
bastard.
third had 2 sisters, Susan, who was born almost 6 years earlier in 1943, and Alan, who was born 2.5 years after Ed in 1951. His father, Edmund Jr., had served in the US Special Forces during the Second World War, sometimes taking assignments that were described as suicide missions. After being honorably discharged, Edmund Jr. transitioned to civilian life as an electrician, at which he made a decent living. His wife, Clarnell, however, snidely described her husband's new profession as quote-unquote menial. Jesus, snob butch. Theirs was not a happy marriage. What a surprise. If you'd chosen a career and your wife was like, that's a menial job, be like, I don't like
Yeah,
you.
what?
You're mean. Between 1953 and 1955, when Ed was between the ages of 4 and 6 years old, Ed's father departed for the Pacific Proving Grounds to take part in various atom bomb tests, leaving Clarnell to raise the 3 children alone. Ed's father would later say of his wife that, quote, suicide missions in wartime in the atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with her. She does sound like a challenge. I mean, like, oh no, I've got to go and do this thing in the military with the atom bombs really far away from you for a really long time. Oh no, oh no. And that his marriage to Clarnell did more damage to his mental health than, quote, more than 396 days and nights fighting on the front did. Yeah. And the Second World War was no picnic. In Ed's own words, his mother had, quote, a very strong and violently outspoken position on men. My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. Clarnell considered most men to be bored and stupid. She thought that men had controlled the world for much of history by sheer brute force, and that the world, in fact, would be much better run by women. She thought men's sexuality came from an entirely negative place, filled with savage and primitive desires, and that to some degree, romance and marriage simply legitimized the rape and enslavement of women. Okay. Your takes went from, like, progressive to, well, slightly insane. If you don't want to get married, don't get
Why
married.
the fuck are you
It's your free
married, you
choice.
moron?
And
You
I'm
had
just
the
gonna go out
kid.
and say, I bet, like, 99% of women are getting married out of their free choice. I mean, not let's just discount the crazy parts of the world where they, you know, stone people to death. But, like, for the most part, women are getting married by their own free will. Right? I'm in a marriage. I'm pretty sure I had to ask.
Yeah,
She also
what the
thought that men were
fuck?
fundamentally weak creatures compared to women, and pathetically could not live up to the moral and ethical standards set for them. Clarnell also chafed at traditional gender roles and the marriage in which she found herself in the 40s and 50s in America. To quote her son, father worked and he brought in a big paycheck. We had a nice house, we went to school, we had birthdays, we had Christmas, we had vacations. He had Saturday night with his poker buddies in the guest house by the garage. We were living pretty good, and she absolutely hated that. The stereotypical response of this deadhead, this buttonhead she was married to, of wanting to go out and play cards in a smoke-filled room, drinking beer with his old war buddies. I mean, this, I have to say, like...
She sounds like
I'm
a
also
bitch,
not
dude,
one
yeah.
for, like, super, like, old-school gender roles, traditional bullshit.
She just sounds like a
But
bitch.
it's also like, well, you sound like a really difficult woman, and playing cards and having a beer with your friends.
Yeah,
I
what
love
the fuck?
having a beer with my friends in a smoke-filled room. Like, I also love my wife, and I spend most of the time with her. But also, if she was super mean like this woman seems, I'd be like, nah, I'd just rather just have a drink with my friends. Jesus. Ed recalled that his mother showered his father with frequent downpours of verbal abuse, belittling his intelligence and emasculating him whenever possible. And you're like, why does he love playing beer, drinking at the pub? Why does he like hanging out with his friends? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because you're a... This resulted in endless rows between the two of them, where Clarnell goaded her husband with stinging remarks until he was insensible with rage and stormed out. He was never physically violent with her. Clarnell's disdain and verbal abuse also extended to her son from an early age, calling him stupid and useless, completely eviscerating the young boy's self-esteem to the point that he'd just meekly do as he was told. Quote, I had no faith in myself at all. I was not an individual. Some experts now speculate that Clarnell may have suffered from borderline personality disorder, which may explain a treatment of her family, though I'm not entirely sold on this diagnosis since it was conducted entirely post-mortem and is mostly dependent on Ed's depiction of her. Yeah, I mean, it's like, obviously there are mental conditions and stuff, but there's also just being a or being
Dude.
again, it just comes... I realise I'm walking like a fine line here because
People
I
always
don't
try to use
wanna
mental
say
illness as an
that someone
excuse
who's
for
got a mental
everything.
condition and is a dickhead because of their mental condition. That's not an excuse. But there's also a degree of self-own. Everything's a scale, right? It's not like yes or no. It's going to be a scale of grey all the way from like full on has this condition to full on does not. And then there's everything in between. And at some point, there's got to be more self-ownership, doesn't there? I feel like that is not an unreasonable thing to say. Like, this woman seems very mean, and you can't just chalk that all up to her not being right in the head. I feel like you've got to, like, I don't know. Is self-ownership such a bad thing? Ownership of your own problems and issues? I don't know. I feel like I'm treading fine line here, but anyway. When Ed was 8 years old, his father came home from work one evening and was shocked to discover that Clarnell had sent their son out earlier that day selling newspapers, telling the boy not to come back until every copy of the paper was sold. Ed had been missing all day, and it was getting dark. His father searched the neighborhood, and after a couple of hours he found Ed sitting miserably next to a stack of newspapers, desperately trying to sell them so his mother would let him come home. Ed's dad sounds like a really... I'm in Ed's dad camp.
Yeah,
He sounds
dude,
like a good
what?
dude.
That sounds like a nice
It would
man.
appear that Clarnell's abuse of Ed was mimicked by his older sister Susan. When Ed was 4 and Susan was 10, she tried to push him in front of a train. Holy dude. When Ed was 5 and Susan was 11, she threw him into the deep end of a swimming pool and he nearly drowned. When Ed was 8 and Susan was 14, she invited him into her bed and sexually molested him. Oh my god.
What?
We've just gone from like holy to
What
holy
the
to
fuck?
oh my god, what are you doing? This is like, don't your kids for sake.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
On a similar note, when Ed was 10 years old while visiting New York City, he was also molested by a male cousin. What is going on in your family, my dudes? Come on.
Cut my life into pieces.
How about just saying
Yo.
less molestation? I'm not saying no molestation. Just less. No, I mean, no would be best. That was a joke. As a lad, Ed joined the Boy Scouts, where he
Jesus
learned many
Christ,
of the
dude.
wilderness survival skills and methods for concealing burials that would serve him well as a murderer years later. Pro tip there, if you want to be a criminal. Wilderness survival. I do feel like wilderness survival people are probably more likely to be murderers as well. I don't know why, they just got that vibe, don't they? I mean, I love it. Like, I'm a big fan. There was this TV show called Ray Mears Extreme Survival or whatever it was called when I was a kid. He was like Bear Grylls, but less piss drinking and more
Bear
sensible.
Grylls.
And it was this great show where he'd go into the jungle and he'd make like camps and stuff and he'd catch little fishes and it was awesome. And I love that stuff. But I do feel it's also like more, the good dude who lives in the woods, sort of like Unabomber style, is more likely to, you know, cut someone's heart out and eat it, right? Especially if you're like a survivalist. If you've got a bunker, I also feel you're more likely to be a murderer. They just feel like, you know, that Venn diagram is going to overlap more than the like person who loves crochet, right? For some reason, maybe it's the love of knives and guns. What are we talking about?
It's a
Oh, yeah,
crochet.
molestation. At summer camp, a visiting
Oh,
member of the National
man.
Rifle Association taught Ed how to use and maintain a gun. While this is the stuff of an all-American boy in the 1950s, Ed did not relate easily to other children, was socially stunted and generally inept. The other kids often made fun of his awkward mannerisms, shy and docile nature, and abnormally large size. Ed demonstrated low self-esteem and even suicidal ideation at a young age. To quote, "One of my favourite tricks back then was to lay in front of cars in traffic. Now I'm walking down the sidewalk with a friend and we're clowning around and I'll say, 'Hey, check this out,' and I'll go lay in the street, like a stiff. I'd lay like I got run over, and a car comes driving by, and of course I'm expecting this guy isn't drunk. I'm expecting this guy isn't slightly demented, and he'll say, 'Hey, there's a kid lying in front of me. Hey, it's another guy's fault.' Thump, thump. And then shift gears, driving right over me. But they were, what the f*** are you thinking about, Ed? Also, I'm really struggling with your, like, I know this is often one of those things where it's like, this is obviously a transcript of spoken words. Really hard to read sometimes. But they always stopped, and they get out of the car and get all upset when I'd get up and walk away. But it was a little game we played. My friends didn't lay in front of the cars, though. I was doing that. It indicated, I think, how little I thought of myself, that a part of me would rather I got run over right then than continue my life. Because looking at myself and how I was developing inside, nothing good could come of that. Similarly, at the age of 10, when Ed was visiting New York City, he climbed over the protective railing at the top of the Empire State Building and had to be pulled back down by his panicked aunt. Again, for Ed, this wasn't just stupid or mindless behavior. He had a legitimate and deeply rooted disregard for his own life, his own worth as a human being, and in many ways, he thought it would be better for him if he did not live anymore. We now know that Ed Kemper was born a congenital psychopath. Wait, I mean, I know it's like a complicated definition and all that stuff, but he does seem to have like a lot of emotions and emotions close to the surface. Like many serial killers on Casual Criminalist, Ed Kemper was one of those 1 to 5% of people neurologically incapable of feeling empathy for others. So what's up with him feeling about him leeching off his friend? That does feel, that is empathy, isn't it? I mean, it could be manufactured empathy, so he can think about it in a more calculated way. But it didn't feel like that. And I guess like when he got all teary-eyed because his mum was murdered, that's not empathy, that's just, you know, feeling for yourself. But it doesn't feel very psychopathy. But again, not an expert.
It's very confusing.
Not criminalist. As such, he had difficulty figuring out how to make friends, or even what one did with them once one had them. But unlike many serial killers, like Ted Bundy, for example, Ed Kemper did not suffer from a corresponding narcissistic personality disorder, which forms another third of the so-called dark triad, since his ego had been thoroughly obliterated by his mother during childhood. As with the final third of the dark triad, Kemper did exhibit early signs of Machiavellian thinking and selfish dishonesty as he, quote, came up with devious ways to get around the rules of the household. This ability to lie and conceal so the darker side of his personality continued into adulthood. Kemper did not, however, lie compulsively or erratically lie like some serial killers and notorious conmen. He was always very deliberate and organized in his deceptions, only lying when he felt he had to. The dark triad is so interesting. The narcissism, the psychopathy, and the Machiavellianism. It's like there's tests you could do for this, right? I wonder, like, I don't know where I'd fall, because also, you know, when you're doing the test, you're like, oh, I know, you know, do I tick this box? I kind of feel this way, but I know that's the wrong answer. It's like, do you think you're awesome? Yes, I mean yes, but no.
You are awesome.
Meanwhile, Ed's psychopathy was severe
Everything
enough
is
that people noticed to get
awesome.
freaked out by him. Like many psychopaths, Ed had no concept that he had been staring at someone too long. As such, he'd look at people quietly without saying anything until they got upset.
Wait, time out. What? So if somebody stares at you for too long, that's like considered psychopath shit? What the fuck?
Competence habitually. He had difficulty relating to friends and also having healthy interactions with girls, a deficiency exacerbated by denigration and shaming inflicted by his mother. As a preteen, a girl who Ed liked tried pressuring him into physical intimacy, and he panicked and rejected her. Quote, she was pretty aggressive, a beautiful young girl, but I wasn't ready for that kind of relationship and I was scared by it. She kind of cowed me into backing away from the relationship. She wanted to kiss and neck and smooch and imitate what she saw in older kids. And that kind of terrified me, because I didn't understand the feelings inside. Like many psychopaths, Ed also did not try very hard at school and was constantly skipping class, despite the fact that he was later determined to have an IQ of between 136 and 148, which is very high. It's very, very smart. Where's genius level? Late 30s? Ed also exhibited the classic signs of violent psychopathy by fantasizing about the murder, torture, and abuse of other people and actively inflicting harm on small animals. He was pulling the legs off insects at a very early age, or trapping them inside bottles and stabbing them with sharp implements. At the age of 7, he stole his father's wartime bayonet, snuck out of the house at night, and watched his second-grade teacher through the windows of her house. When Ed... Dude. This is like... I mean...
What?
When he starts killing cats... We need to get him to a psychiatrist. Maybe do that already. Yeah. I mean, yeah, don't be like pulling the legs off insects and just standing outside your teacher's window. It's pretty worrying behavior, dude. When Ed was 8, he confided in his older sister, Susan, that he had a crush on her school teacher. She teased him, oh, why don't you kiss her? To which Ed replied, I can't. I'd have to kill her first. Uh-oh. That's another warning sign. Where it's like, what's he up to? Oh, yeah, he's killed a cat. And he said that he would have to murder a woman before he kissed her.
Yeah, that's pretty suspect, though.
At age 10, Ed killed a cat by burying it alive. Well, there we go. Once it had suffocated to death, Ed dug it up, brought it into the house. In his room, he cut off the cat's head and stuck it on a makeshift pike so that he could look at it. Ed then disposed of the cat's remains and felt a sense of pleasure that he managed to successfully deceive his family about it. That's all sorts of up, dude. Around the same age, Ed was playing around with a cap gun and in an argument had it broken by his younger sister, Alan. In retaliation, Ed stormed into her room, popped off the head of her Barbie doll, and realizing the head could just be reattached, he took a pair of scissors and cut off the doll's hands. After handing it back to his 7-year-old sister, he said, quote, here, now you've got a toy that doesn't work too, and I don't have a toy that works too good. After that incident, Ed developed a taste for mutilating toy dolls, and it became a sort of ritual for him. I have to say, like, of all the worrying behavior,
What the
I
fuck?
probably did that to my sister's toys as a kid. Like, it should be like, you broke my toy, so I broke yours. I'm not sure that I'd cut the hands off. That is a bit psycho. But, you know, kids being kids, that is not burying a cat, waiting for it to suffocate, taking it to your room, cutting its head off, and sticking it on a pike. There is a big difference between those two activities. At age 13, Ed shot a dog that belonged to another boy in the neighborhood. Ed did so for no other reason than to see what it would be like. If someone shoots a dog, and then you ask, why did you shoot the dog? And they're like, I wanted to know what it was like to shoot a dog. Oh my good lord, let's
Dude, what is
just
going
start
on right
figuring
now?
out the cocktail of drugs that you need to take, like, ASAP. After that, he became a social pariah and was bullied and physically threatened by a mob of teenage boys. Already standing at 6'4", none of them dared threaten him one-on-one, but at one point the threats nearly turned into a lynching, and Ed had to flee to a nearby house where a woman had to call the police to disperse the crowd of angry teens. Oh my god. When you are such a crazy, like, dog murdering, cat burying
Yeah, you kind of
psycho,
deserve that, you fucking
that
weirdo.
a gang of people get together to chase after you and beat you up. You know, like, why is someone not stepping in at this point and putting him in, like, a special school, or, like, putting him in with, like
a psycho
I
ward.
don't know, whoever looks after people like this. I know it's back in the day, but still, come on. That same year, when Ed was 13, he was in his bedroom sharpening a knife and his father's machete. He observed the family cat, a Siamese, asleep in a nearby chair. Ed disliked it because it seemed to favour his younger sister, Alan, and she did response to his attempts to train it. Yeah, it's a cat, mate. And also, it's not going to like you, because it's probably like, well, you cut off the head of my mate, didn't you? You psycho. It's like, why don't you like me, cat? Because I can see the cat skull on your shelf. You weirdo. Why would I like you? You're just going to cut my head off. Ed picked up the cat by the scruff of its neck, took the machete, and cut off the top of the cat's skull so the brain was exposed. Oh my god. The cat started to have a seizure. Ed then took his knife and stabbed the cat multiple times in the ribs and stomach.
What
He then
the
dissected it and buried the majority of the cat in the backyard, keeping some of the cat's intestines wrapped up in an old shirt in his closet. When his mother later found those remains, please tell me the next line is she called the emergency helpline for crazy people and got him committed. Please, good lord, please. She asked him where they'd come from and if it had something to do with the cat's disappearance. Ed, not very convincingly, lied about the intestines and denied harming the cats. We know you did it, Ed! On his harming of animals, Ed later said, quote, "It's not for me to judge these mental health professionals, but when they look at me here on Monday morning after the football game and they say, gee, here's all these little parts of the puzzle, oh well, harming animals indicates what he was going to do. And if that's the case, I want to know about the teenage kids or the preteen kids who are going through these raging moods and attitudes that go out and kill neighborhood cats and hang them up from a telephone pole or hang them from a tree, shoot them full of arrows and set fire to them. Where are those children today? Are they serial killers? Or are they police chiefs and mayors and aldermen and assemblymen? Ed, what are you talking about? You're smart. So I'm just trying to decipher, like, what you're actually saying.
Yeah, what the fuck are you talking about, dude?
Just because he's smart doesn't mean it's going to make sense, because obviously he's a psycho. But what's he getting at here?
I'm so
He's kind of
confused.
saying that
I have
not
no
all
idea,
people
man.
who torture animals grow up to be psychos, and it's like, no, sure, but it definitely is like an indicator, Ed. People should have looked at that. To answer Ed's question, in case anyone is curious, not all psychopaths, even those who harm animals in childhood, go on to become killers. Of the roughly 1 in 100 people who display all the signs of psychopathy and the 1 in 20 people who display some of the signs, many become functioning psychopaths in the same way that one can be a functioning alcoholic. Their lack of empathy, their ruthlessness and impulsiveness do not bring them into trouble with the law, or at least they don't get caught. In some professions, being a psychopath can actually be a positive asset, and psychopaths tend to cluster towards careers as businessmen, lawyers, politicians, media personalities. No! No, David! I, as sort of a businessman and a media personality, I also studied law. Salespeople, haven't done that. I mean, sort of. I worked on the phone as a sales, but oh god! Surgeons, journalists, police officers, religious leaders, chefs, and civil servants. Well, okay, that's also a huge number of people, because that's a lot of career paths. Essentially, any career that has a high level of influence and social status that could be potentially lucrative and requires a high level of confidence, a somewhat cutthroat attitude, and ability to divorce themselves from the harm and distress they may cause other human beings in the course of their duties.
Simon is an unusual subject.
Oh, good lord. I mean, yeah, I do something that I suppose has a fairly high level of influence, and I mean, social status these days. I don't really feel like what I do. It's like weird that it has social status, but I guess it does. It's definitely lucrative.
Oh man, alright, well I did promise to get to the Lego stream, so we're gonna stop that right there. We're gonna continue this tomorrow. I'll save this shit. And YouTube, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.